Alright, the game is SPI's War of the Ring. It's the board for it. This is not the first time I've played this by any chance. It's actually been kind of difficult for me to get excited about it because maybe this is a game whose time has long passed for me. Back when I was, I don't remember exactly when I got it. I think I was around 13 or so. I was so excited by it. Maybe I was a little older. I was absolutely dying for this sucker to come to my house by mail. And, for a few years I really liked it. I didn't overplay it, no question there. I didn't get a lot of playing, but it felt like one of those games that was really an important part of my collection. Now, it's something I barely ever pull out and play. So, you're not getting that early wonderment, and you're not getting the respect due to a game that's kept my interest all these years. There aren't a lot that have, to tell you the truth. I'm not sure if I can think of one. I mean, I'm thinking back, Empires of the Middle Ages. There's one. There's one from about this time period, although that came a little later for me. I cannot think of many games from this era, if any. Yeah, I can think of one, Voyage of the Pandora, but and Dune and Elric. This one, however, didn't make that cut, basically, and maybe we'll see a few of the reasons why. It's not a bad game, but the excitement is gone, and it got enough playing over its time. So what you've got is a game that covers actually two major different games, and then some scenarios within the campaign game itself. The basic game, or the character game, is the stack of characters here who are trying to get the ring down to Mount Doom, and the evil Sauron player is trying to stop them. I'm going to be playing as the army game. I think I'm only going to play the two-player game. I think it opens up more options, actually, than the three-player game, and makes me a little more comfortable. In the two-player game, you add a lot of military, or a military component to the game. The goal is still largely the same. The Fellowship wants to destroy the ring. The Sauron player wants to capture the ring. But there are alternative ways of victory. The Sauron player, for example, can win, and they can win in the character game too, if the characters are delaying the game too much. They can win by capturing certain key locations on the board, and the Fellowship can win by capturing certain key evil locations, like Barad-dûr, as well as holding on to all their original. There's a three-player version, which adds Saruman as a third power with the ability to grab the ring and try to dominate Middle-earth on his own. And he can take the Nazgul over if he gets the ring, and really provides himself as sort of an interesting counterpoise to the base conflict. And then somewhere or another, and I don't have it, there's 5-player rules that add a couple more good power players. I think they add Rohan and Gondor as separate players. Their interests seem to really all the good player powers seem too united in their goal to really divide their interests. If it was a bigger, more complex game like World in Flames or maybe A3R or something like that, it makes sense to split these powers out and give more players more of the positions. But really, like a World War II game, there's only 3 powers you could really focus on. There's, your Western power, you're communist and Russian, and then you have, the Nazis and the fascists. Although actually, in a way, Japan is almost their own power. They're separate enough that they could be played completely differently. But when it comes down to it, this would be very difficult with the small number of pieces to really play Gondor and Rohan separately. So, although I kind of wanted to get a hold of that piece, I didn't manage it. We got a lot of different pieces here, a lot of different army pieces to begin with, and you can see lots and lots of counters over there. You really don't need most of them. There's a lot of replacement point counters, far more than you actually need for the game, and maybe not the right mix that you need. Then you have these little character cards, which give some information. This is their physical combat. It's morale, which is important if it's not parenthesized. It's important for physical combat. You combine the combat rating and the morale for physical combat, but it's also important for army combat if it's not parenthesized. Endurance is how many hit points you can take, and that's going to be reflected over here on this chart. And I reuse these, so I erase them all the time. Those are just photocopies, actually, that I do that with. But the ring rating, which is a determination of how easily the character can remove the ring if they're wearing it. And the lower the number, the better. Your best character for that is actually, I think... Oh, no. The higher the number, the better, I guess. The best character for that are the hobbits. And they're the people you want carrying the ring, if at all possible. If you give the ring to an Aragorn or a Gandalf, they can become very, very potent. But there's a risk they can't take it off, and there's a risk that they're seduced by its power into becoming the equivalent of Sauron. Alright, I actually thought Aragorn and Gandalf weren't bad. I see Legolas is pretty decent. Gimli's pretty decent. The last people you want to give it to are your heroes. You also, and this is, your fellowship here. You have a bunch of leaders from the free people who have their own cards. They can't go join the fellowship. This isn't in the Fellowship of the Ring game. You can actually have them join the fellowship player once things break, or if they split up in a kind of weird fashion. And then the evil player also has character cards, mainly for the Nazgul. We have the Mouth of Sauron here. We have Saruman and Chief of the Dunlendings, with different ratings. And one of the ratings that's possible, and that a number of the Nazgul and others have, is sorcery, and of course Gandalf has that as well, which is going to affect both melee combat as well as army combat. Some of the systems here, the character combat system, etc., are used in other SPI games of this era. You see them in Freedom in the Galaxy to some extent. You see them in, I think, John Carter has similar stuff. I don't remember. There were others that I think had this too. It was sort of there was a whole genre of games they put out. Oh yeah, Swords and Sorcery. Which I have to have kicking around here now. There it is. There was somewhat of a genre of these games that came out all at once in SPI. They came up with the system, I think in this one, although I may be mistaken, and they used it for a number of different games. Let's take a look at what the actual rules were kind of like. I don't want to go in absolute depth here, but, well, I'm not going to be looking at the character game, so I want to move on to the sequence of play in the army game. Unfortunately, the difference here is there's less information in the sequence of play. So it's kind of a pain in the butt to flip between the two. It's just a situation. The rules aren't bad in general. This is just one thing where you wish you had an additional little player aids or something to help you cope with that situation. Anyway, in the ring phase, that's the first phase in the game. If the ring bearer, whoever's carrying the ring, and that starts off as Frodo, and he can't get rid of it. He can't pass it off to anyone. He's got to carry it until his death. If he's wearing the ring, he takes an endurance hit here. And these are permanent. They're a circle around, you'll see here, around the endurance factor, and those can't be healed. And once they're fully taken, he would become a ring wraith. At this point, you can also remove the ring, and by rolling a die, and you roll, I think it's under, or equal to or under, your ring rating. Events phase. So this is one of the mechanisms that gets carried into a couple of other games. This mechanism definitely, I'm trying to remember which game it slid into. One of those others takes it wholeheartedly. Okay, well, let me explain it. Each player on their turn draws one of these event cards. If they have too many, if they have 3, if they draw a 4th one, they must either play or discard, and they discard face down, and it becomes available for either player to draw then later in the game. So if you are discarding a card because it's not good for you, but it might be good for your opponent, they might pick it up. As cards are played, they're put face up underneath the discard deck. I played that wrong for a long time and just put them on top. So there's always going to be, once there's a discard face down, there's always going to be one available to people unless everybody draws them out completely. But the thing is, there's no guarantee that a card that you're discarding is good for your opponent either. There's a good likelihood it's one that has its times passed in the game, like once the fellowships moved past the Misty Mountains, the passes for the Misty Mountains become pretty unimportant. Anyway, some of the cards may not seem very valuable, so you might discard them then, and your opponent, if they pick them up, might not be thrilled with what they grab. I'll be using some die rolling to make the decisions there, whether or not somebody wants to draw a card that their opponent threw out. Then we go to the search phase, and the search phase is again done with cards, and these guys, and I'm going to have to reshuffle them. You draw one of these, and you draw actually from the bottom here. These guys tell you how many strength points of a particular type of orc in certain regions, and the evil player gets to choose how to appropriate them within those regions, but the good stacks will probably not be in many of them, so there's a good chance they might send the entire points to search in one place. Another option is to use Nazgul to search. Doing this, I believe, costs something called shadow points, which you would keep track of here. And shadow points are how the evil player is basically prevented from doing everything at once. At the beginning of the game, he's already limited by them, but as the game continues, his army stack, those black and reddish pieces, end up in quite a few places on the board. They're quite expensive to move. Coordinating his big army moves, it becomes impossible in addition to hunting for the Fellowship player, and that's why that's kind of there. Okay, then we go to the Fellowship player turn, and the Fellowship is allowed to move his characters, and as mobilized forces. At the beginning of the game, nothing's really mobilized. It kind of takes Gandalf to walk down to Rohan or Minas Tirith to activate those forces. For the rest of the free people, you have to kind of wait until Sauron or the evil player attacks you. And once he attacks, then they become mobilized. Now, mobilization doesn't just mean you can move. It also is going to affect your reinforcements. Once you mobilize, the next turn you get reinforcements, and the next turn, etc. For the evil player, mobilization leads to a long string of reinforcements. For the good player, it's just a couple turns. For the evil player, Saruman comes into play and mobilizes on turn 2. So he's going to have his stuff available fairly early. He can attack Rohan fairly early, but that'll bring them in earlier. For Sauron himself to mobilize Mordor, he has to either wait until turn 7, which is when he automatically mobilizes, or he has to spot a hobbit using the search mechanism. Now, I haven't really explained the search mechanism. No big shock. I haven't really explained much of anything. We have our standard terrain effects chart, which gives you the costs for moving things. Well, the search table, there's search points, which is, I believe, 2 points per Nazgul and 1 point per point of orcs searching. And you compare that to the number of characters in the hex and get a chance of a search. If you get a C and it's orcs searching, they have the option to capture. From what I understand, and I think I misplayed this most of the time, Nazgul do not get a chance to attack you when they're searching during the search phase. But they do get a chance if they're searching during the movement phase or something like that. Okay. What else do we have here? Right. So, the Fellowship can also be searched for as he moves through evil player units. And the search points will be the number of orcs present or the Nazgul present at that time. And this leads to what I saw maybe for the first time. And again, I haven't played this very extensively, even though I was excited as hell about the game. And I never really played it as a game. I played it as a simulation, trying, to make my way with the ring down to Orodrun, and at the same time, the evil player's hunting and trying to conquer, say, Minas Tirith. Well, from people who play a great deal and have sort of studied the game, which might even be just like 4 or 5 playings, the optimal solution turns out to be just creating this barrier of orcs around Mordor and in the Barad-dûr area, and preventing the Fellowship from being able to move the ring forward without a risk. And then moving forward and making the attacks slowly, hoping to catch the ring on its way in, I guess. I'm not pleased by this. I don't know if I'm going to try it or if I'm just going to play my little story the way I usually used to. I wasn't terribly thrilled with it as a story, and I know I would be really unhappy with it as a game if it degenerates into what it seems like it does. Then the Dark Power player gets to move, and on his movement, he's relegated by these shadow points. He selects a secret shadow point letter and writes it down at the beginning of the turn, and then rolls a die and gets a random number of points ranging between 9 and 13. Well, because I'm playing alone, I'm going to do these out in the open, and I'm just going to do 8 plus... That doesn't make sense, does it? Between 8 and 13. Good. It's going to be 7 plus the roll of a die, which means, for example, if I roll a 5, I would be getting 12 shadow points. And I'll move them down because the counter says available. Normally you'd be moving them up. in opposition to what the counter says, because you don't want to reveal to your opponent what you've got. Let's see what else we got here. We've got costs. What it costs the evil player to move forces. Moving Nazgul themselves costs 2. Moving stacks of units. The bigger the stack, the more it costs. Actually initiating combat costs. Even defending costs. Unless you want to take it at half strength only. Alright. And let's see what else we got. There's a lot of other little things in here that have kind of been skipped. So first of all, there's the events, which, like in a CDG, are a bunch of little factors that just, you can't go into every little detail of that during a discussion of the initial stage of the game, and they add the same kind of flavor that the events for a CDG do. Then there's these Servants of Sauron, and I've set them up and don't want to reshuffle them again. There's certain locations on the map with an eye, which indicate that when the Fellowship player moves through there with characters, they could be facing a monster. It doesn't have to search for them or anything. It will find them if it's present. There are some rumors in there, and it gives something of the same flavor that Fellowship of the Ring did, but a little bit less, at least from my point of view, a little bit less suspenseful and exciting, because the evil player knows what's there, and he doesn't really control what's there in the same way. That's just my feeling. Perhaps other people get more out of the random side of it. I know I like randomness in a lot of things. I don't really feel too excited by this because of how it falls. Then we've got magic items, and at the beginning of the game, the Fellowship player is going to be able to grab the magic items from Rivendell. We've got a few here. Not the exact pile that would have historically been there, but some of them. Anduril, Sting, Shadowfax. Well, Gandalf didn't really use Shadowfax after that, so he probably put Shadowfax somewhere else. Maybe in Edoras, historically. Gladriel's Light, obviously, would be in Lorien. But these are what are going to be available to my characters, and they get assigned to specific characters. And if the character dies, the item falls to the ground, and during combat, after combat, it can be picked up and used later. What else do we have here? Just trying to see if there's anything else of great excitement. Let's take a look at how combat itself is handled. This is an interesting system for combat that, again, this I've seen elsewhere. So the individual combat system is the same one that's been used in some of the other games, such as Freedom in the Galaxy, where you get a differential between attacker and defender. So let's take a quick example. Let's say Spam here is fighting the Lord of the Nazgul. Well, the Lord of the Nazgul has a total combat and morale of 7, and Sam has a 4. So Sam would be attacking on the -3 table, which isn't good for him, and at the same time the Lord of the Nazgul would attack at the +3 table. Combat's not a single combat, so if two groups meet, they each send one champion forward, and then fought out to the death for the most part. And the winner stays there in the center for the next combatant to come forward. I don't like how that plays out. I don't feel like... I used to tinker with that and do lines of combat where, you know, all the Fellowship players would go one-on-one with one evil player or whatever. I'm not sure if I have a good solution for it, but I never liked the way the combat actually fell out during the game. You may see that I tweak that a bit. And you get casualties to the attacker and the defender. Now, both sides have to fight. So if Sam is fighting the Lord of the Nazgul, he can't just stand there and take hits on the +3 table and hope he gets kind of lucky and trades even, he's got to attack on the -3 table too, which is much worse than the +3 table. He can't avoid his sort of duty in a combat to roll the die. And I find that kind of disturbing as well, for other reasons. Okay. For army combat, you determine an odds chart, and you roll a die. There may be some modifiers there. In particular, you modify it by the morale value, which is the command rating, as well as by sorcery. Now, sorcery can be used in individual combat too. Instead of attacking, you're allowed to just roll on the sorcery table. You almost always want to do this because it's safer than actually attacking. For the army combat table, it adds to your morale, which will add to your die roll modifier. And then you get, really, an attacker-defender percentage loss. That's percentage of the force that's taking the loss. It's not like an Empires and Arms type thing where you're getting a percentage loss of the guy firing. And Ks indicate that individuals are going to be killed. I'm going to wrap this up here. I know I haven't really touched all that much on the rules. I don't want to go completely into the rules. I don't think that's very helpful here. I gave a few of the systems and the back feelings. And if you want to catch more of the flavor of the game, well, watch some of the playthroughs. I'll be back in a bit.